Hey guys, welcome to our next week of e-learning. You guys are doing well. We've been doing this long enough now that I think most of you are accustomed to it. Just remember, it's your responsibility to send these things in to me. I still, every week, at the end of the week after I grade, have a few folks that I'm having to send emails out and say, I haven't got your work. Just a reminder, if we were still in class, you wouldn't be getting this. You'd just be getting a 0 for not doing it. So we know it's a new situation. We're trying to help, but it is your responsibility to get this stuff to me and all of your teachers by 8 o'clock Friday night. That's the deadline that Dr. Johns has set for us. This week, you're going to be working on writing another paper. This is going to be historical fiction. Because this is going to be a story, I'm going to lengthen it a little bit, and I think you'll be glad that I did because it's really hard to write a story in one page. So let this be something you have fun with, not something that stresses you out. So again, same format as before. If you're typing it, it needs to be double spaced, a page and a half. If you're handwriting it, you need to skip a line, and so yours is now going to need to be like 2.5 pages. And I know that seems like a lot, but once you start writing your story, you're going to get to that point and probably find you need more. So think of this as a little short story. It is historical fiction. Now, I am on page 179 in your book, so if you want to pause me until you get your book and get to that page, go ahead and do that. All right, 179 tells you the definition of historical fiction. Historical fiction is one, fiction, it's not true, but two, it is historical. So that means the things that you talk about have to be from a particular time period. I'm not going to tell you what to write about, but it does have to be historical fiction, and I will tell you the time period, okay? It needs to be World War II or before. Now, World War II was 1939 to 1945. So you need to write a historical fiction that takes place during that time or before, nothing after 1945. So historical fiction is fiction, it's a story, but it has to be set historically. So if you choose to write a story about World War II and you throw in something about a smartphone, then you've messed up because they weren't around then. So you have to be careful that all the things that you talk about are historically accurate. That being said, I'm going to have to see some history in your paper. So you just can't write a story about John Doe and have no historical references in it. It has to relate to some period in history. That's what makes it historical fiction. Okay, so you got to give me some things. You got to, talk about maybe the way he was dressed, or entertainment, or vehicles, depending on what time period you're writing in. You got to give me some kind of references in there that lets me know what time period it is without you telling me this took place during the Civil War or World War II. Do not, listen guys, real close to this, do not tell me when this story takes place, okay? Remember, when we're writing, we are showing more than we are telling. So don't tell me I'm going to write you a paper that happened during World War II. I have to be able to determine that. Or I'm going to write you a paper about something that happened during the Civil War. I have to know that from the historical references that you put in your paper. That being said, unless you know a whole lot about the historical time period you're writing about, you're going to have to do some research. So if you're going to describe how Jane Doe was dressed and you're writing during the Civil War, you're going to have to research how women dressed or what name you give to your character. If you're writing, say, during World War I, you're going to need to Google and say what were some common names used during World War I. So you're going to have to do some research. I doubt very seriously that any of you will know enough about the history of any one period that you could write without doing some research. Now, obviously, if you have your history book, you can use that, or you can use the internet. You have plenty of resources, but I need to see some references in there that let me know what time period you're writing in without you telling me I'm going to give you a story about World War II or World War I or the Civil War. Again, do not tell me which period you're writing about. I just need to see it in your story. Okay, in your books over on page 181, it talks about the setting. These should be terms that you're familiar with from your literature and writing class with Miss Rubel and even before. The setting in historical fiction is the time and the place. Again, don't tell me this story happened on such a date in such a place. I just need to see that within the story somewhere. Page 182 is planning the main character. Now remember, this is a short story, so you need one main character and maybe no more characters, but at the most no more than one or two other characters. This is not a book, so you don't have room for a bunch of characters. So main character, again, make sure the name that you give to this character fits the time period that you're writing about. Next page over, 183, and is conflict and resolution. Good stories, good books always have conflict. Now, this is very short, so you're probably not going to have space for more than just one major conflict. The resolution is how it is resolved, how the character works through it. Now, if you read on page 183, this conflict is the struggle that keeps your story moving, and it can be between your main character and another character. It can be your character facing the elements of nature. It could be your character struggling with themselves in some way. Maybe it's an emotional conflict. They have something that's happened in their past. It can be a struggle with nature and the elements of nature, but there needs to be conflict in there. That's what makes the story interesting. And then it needs to be resolved in some way. Can you leave me with a cliffhanger at the end? Yes, and you might want to. That's up to you. And if you don't know what the cliffhanger is, that means at the very end it just kind of drops off like some movies do, and it doesn't end like we want to, or we don't know what happens to the character after a certain point. You're just kind of left hanging. That's okay. All right. Remember again, do more showing than you do telling. That's what makes for good writing. It takes effort to do this because we tend to want to tell or narrate the events rather than show what happened. So here's the difference. I can say in my story, it was hot when John got off the ship. I have told you, okay? I have not shown you in a statement such as that. It was hot when John got off the ship. To tell, or rather to show, I could say, sweat beaded across John's forehead as he got off the ship. Well, if we sweat, normally it's because we're hot. Now, I know we sweat for other reasons. Maybe we're nervous or panicking, but in your setting, showing me or that making a statement like that lets me know that it's hot. Remember, you assume your reader is intelligent and they can figure things out. So do more showing than you do telling. Over on page 185, planning the plot. The plot is a series of events that take place. So in your short story, you need a beginning, a middle, and an end in that order. And so you need to think ahead of time before you just sit down and start writing. All right, how's this going to begin? What do I want to happen in the middle? And how's it going to end? What's the conflict going to be? What's the climax? That's another term on that same page. That's the highest point of your story, and usually thereafter the character or characters, they're resolving whatever the conflict is. So you got to plan in a story just as if you were writing a book. You need what's going to happen. Okay, so that's your assignment. That's one assignment, and so you'll have all week to do that. It'll be due by 8 on Friday. Again, a page and a half typed. If you write 2.5 pages, skipping spaces between lines. Historical fiction, just make sure you go over this chapter in your book, all those pages that I've referenced, to make sure you're doing everything correctly. Okay, you'll have another video on Wednesday, and what that video will concern is we're going back to verbs. So the rest of our time together, however that looks, it's going to be a mixture of writing and then reviewing the parts of speech that we've learned, because we're done with the parts of speech. So we're going to go back and review, and I'll start with verbs, which is what we started with at the beginning of the year. But that'll be coming on Wednesday. All right, that wraps it up for today. Have a good day, guys.